If you're over 60 and you jump out of bed the second your eyes open, stop reading anything else for the next few minutes and listen to this first. Because what I'm about to explain about the first 10 minutes after you wake up could genuinely change how you start every single day from here on out, and it has almost nothing to do with willpower or discipline. It has to do with something happening inside your cardiovascular system that most people have never had explained to them clearly. Here's the plain truth. Heart attacks and strokes don't happen randomly throughout the day. They cluster heavily in the first few hours after waking. Researchers have documented this pattern for decades, and while the exact reasons are still being studied, the leading explanation centers on something called the morning blood pressure surge, a natural sharp rise in blood pressure, heart rate, and stress hormones that happens as your body transitions from sleep to wakefulness. For most people, that surge is a normal, healthy part of starting the day. But for some, especially adults over 60 managing blood pressure or heart health already, that same surge becomes the exact window where a heart attack or stroke is statistically most likely to occur. My name is Dr. William Parker. For 21 years, I've worked with adults over 60, and I want to walk you through 4 completely ordinary morning habits that can make that natural surge more dangerous than it needs to be, along with simple, realistic adjustments that work with your body's rhythm instead of against it. If you caught my earlier video on heart health, I like to dig into the specific practical details that often get skipped over. This one picks up that same thread with a fresh set of tips focused entirely on your morning routine, a piece we haven't covered together before. Stay with me through all 4 of these today, because the third one surprises almost everyone, and the fourth one is the habit I see skipped more than any other, even though it may be the simplest fix on this entire list. Quick note before we continue, if you find this useful, go ahead and subscribe now. This channel is built around exactly this kind of calm, practical health information, and it genuinely helps more people find it when you do that. Now let's get into it. Before we look at the 4 habits themselves, you need one concept, because without it, the rest of today won't fully click into place. I call it the morning vulnerability window. Here's what's actually happening inside your body in the first hour or so after you wake up. 3 things specifically. First, your blood pressure doesn't just wake up gradually alongside you, it spikes. Research using 24-hour blood pressure monitoring has consistently shown a steep, rapid rise in blood pressure in the minutes surrounding waking, distinct from the more gradual pressure you experience throughout the rest of the day. Second, this isn't only about blood pressure. Your body also releases a surge of stress hormones, including cortisol and adrenaline, as part of waking up, and those hormones further activate your cardiovascular system, increasing heart rate and how hard your heart is working right, as that blood pressure spike is also happening. Third, and this is the part most people never hear about, several large studies have found that an unusually steep or exaggerated version of this morning surge is associated with a meaningfully higher risk of stroke. Specifically, particularly in older adults with existing high blood pressure, above and beyond what their blood pressure looks like the rest of the day. To put a number on that, researchers who have studied this specifically have found that an exaggerated morning blood pressure surge is associated with roughly a 30 to 45% increase in hazard of cardiovascular events compared to a more typical gradual morning rise. That's a meaningful difference, and it's specifically tied to how steep and sudden that surge is, not just to someone's overall blood pressure numbers throughout the day. 2 people can have similar average blood pressure readings and still face different levels of morning risk depending on how sharply that pressure climbs in the minutes after waking. Here's the cascade this creates. You wake up and your blood pressure and stress hormones begin climbing on their own as a completely normal part of being human. Then certain morning habits, jumping up suddenly, an abrupt temperature shock, caffeine hitting an already activated system, arrive right on top of that natural surge, adding additional cardiovascular stress during the exact window when your heart and blood vessels are already working harder than usual. Layer enough of these on top of each other, morning after morning, year after year, and you're asking your cardiovascular system to handle its most vulnerable hour with the least amount of support. Keep the morning vulnerability window in mind as we go through each of these 4 habits today, because every single one connects back to the same natural surge, either working with it gently or adding unnecessary strain on top of it. Now, take a moment and think back to how mornings used to feel 10 or 15 years ago. Do you remember getting out of bed without a second thought? No dizziness? No need to sit for a moment first? Do you remember your first cup of coffee not affecting you the way it seems to now? A lot of people over 60 notice these small shifts and just assume mornings have simply gotten harder with age without ever connecting it to anything specific. If any of that sounds familiar, this video was made specifically for you. Here's what I need you to understand before we go any further. None of what we're discussing today means your mornings are working against you or that something is fundamentally wrong. The morning surge itself is completely normal, and it happens to everyone, every single day, at every age. What we're talking about is simply reducing unnecessary additional stress during a window your body is already managing carefully on its own. The research on this is well established, and every adjustment I'm going to walk you through today is genuinely simple, nothing extreme, nothing that requires overhauling your entire routine. But before we go deeper, if you'd like a structured way to build habits like these into a simple daily routine, I've put together a free longevity guide linked in the description below. Thousands of people in this community already use it. Go grab it now, and we'll keep walking through today's topic together. So, how does this actually work in the body? Picture your cardiovascular system overnight as a river that's been flowing gently, calmly, at low volume while you sleep. Your heart rate slows, your blood pressure dips, and everything settles into a quieter rhythm. Waking up is like a dam opening all at once, redirecting a rapid, forceful surge of water back into that same river within a matter of minutes. That surge is necessary. It's what gets you up, alert, and moving. But a river that's just received a sudden surge of water is also more vulnerable to erosion, to pressure on its banks right at that moment of transition compared to when it's already flowing steadily. Your blood vessels experience something similar. The sudden shift from the calm of sleep to the surge of waking puts brief, but real additional pressure on your arteries, particularly if those arteries are already somewhat stiffened or narrowed from years of blood pressure or cholesterol issues, which becomes more common with age. Now that you understand why this window matters, let's look at exactly what makes it riskier, one habit at a time. Multiple studies using continuous blood pressure monitoring have found that cardiovascular events, including heart attacks, strokes, and sudden cardiac death, occur disproportionately in the first 4 to 6 hours after waking, compared to what you'd expect if these events were evenly distributed throughout the day. That's not a coincidence. That's physiology tied directly to the surge we've just described. And it changes how we should think about the specific choices we make in those first several minutes of being awake. I've ranked 4 habits from important to most critical, so you know exactly which ones deserve your attention first. And the 4th one on this list is the piece most people skip entirely, even though it may be the single easiest adjustment on this whole list. Stay with me, because it only makes sense once you understand everything that comes before it. The first habit is jumping out of bed immediately after waking. Harold was 69 and had done the same thing every morning of his adult life. Alarm goes off, feet hit the floor, straight into the day. Most people think getting up quickly is simply a sign of energy or discipline, nothing to think twice about. That's not the full picture. When you go from lying flat to standing upright quickly, gravity pulls a noticeable amount of blood downward into your legs almost instantly, and your cardiovascular system needs a moment to adjust blood vessel tone and heart rate to compensate and keep blood flowing adequately to your brain. This adjustment happens automatically in a healthy body, but it takes a few seconds to catch up, and doing it abruptly right on top of the morning surge we just discussed asks your system to manage 2 rapid adjustments at once instead of 1. This combination is part of why lightheadedness or brief dizziness upon standing, a phenomenon doctors call orthostatic hypotension, becomes noticeably more common with age, and why it carries real consequences, including a higher risk of falls beyond just feeling briefly unsteady. It's worth knowing what this actually feels like, since it's easy to dismiss as simply not being a morning person, a brief graying or dimming of vision upon standing. A few seconds of unsteadiness, or a feeling of your heart briefly racing or fluttering right after getting up are all common signs of this adjustment period being pushed too quickly. Most people experience some mild version of this occasionally, and it's nothing to be alarmed by. But if it happens consistently most mornings, or if it's severe enough that you genuinely worry about losing your balance, that's specific and useful information to bring to your doctor, since it may point to blood pressure medication that needs adjusting or simply confirm that this exact habit change is worth prioritizing. The practical fix here is simple. When you wake up, sit on the edge of the bed for 1 to 2 minutes before standing. Let your feet touch the floor, take a few slow breaths, and give your blood pressure and heart rate a brief window to stabilize before asking your body to fully transition to standing and moving. The mistake most people make is treating this pause as unnecessary or even a little silly, something only frail people need to do, when in reality it's a simple, low-effort habit that works with your body's natural adjustment period instead of rushing past it. Now, the second habit works on a completely different mechanism, and this one surprises almost everyone the first time they hear it clearly explained. Drinking coffee on an empty stomach first thing in the morning. Dorothy was 72, and her morning coffee had been the very first thing she reached for every day for as long as she could remember, often before she'd had a single sip of water. Most people think coffee's effects on the body are essentially the same, no matter when you drink it. That's not quite accurate when it comes to timing relative to this specific morning window. Caffeine is a stimulant that activates your sympathetic nervous system, the same fight or flight system already ramping up as part of your natural morning surge, and research has consistently shown that caffeine produces a measurable acute rise in both blood pressure and heart rate shortly after consumption, an effect that tends to be more pronounced in people who don't drink caffeine regularly and somewhat blunted, though not eliminated, in habitual coffee drinkers. The concern isn't that coffee itself is dangerous for most people with healthy hearts, it's the timing. Drinking it immediately upon waking means the caffeine's own stimulating effect lands directly on top of the natural surge already happening, rather than after that initial surge has had a little time to settle. The practical fix is straightforward and doesn't require giving up coffee at all. Drink a full glass of water first thing when you wake up and give yourself 20 to 30 minutes before your first cup of coffee. This isn't about caffeine being forbidden. It's about not stacking two separate cardiovascular activators directly on top of each other during your body's most sensitive window. If you're currently on blood pressure medication, this is also worth mentioning to your doctor specifically, since certain medications and caffeine sensitivity can interact in ways that are worth understanding individually rather than guessing about. The mistake most people make is treating their morning coffee as a completely automatic first step, reaching for it before their feet have even properly hit the floor, without realizing that a 20-minute delay costs nothing and works with their body's timing instead of against it. If you're a caregiver or family member, rather than the person managing this yourself, mornings are also a genuinely useful window to pay attention to from the outside. Someone who seems unusually winded, pale, or unsteady, specifically in the first half hour after waking, but who seems perfectly fine an hour later, is showing a pattern worth mentioning to their doctor, since it points directly at this morning window rather than something happening throughout the day generally. That kind of specific, time-linked observation is often more useful to a physician than a general sense that something seems a little off lately. Quick pause here. Has your doctor ever specifically talked to you about the timing of your morning coffee in relation to your blood pressure? Drop a comment and let me know either way. You'd be surprised how many people watching this have never had that specific conversation, even if they've discussed blood pressure at length otherwise. All right. Everything up to this point has mattered, but what I'm about to share now is where the real conversation begins. These are the two habits people come back and tell me changed how they think about their entire morning routine, not just their heart health specifically. The third habit is taking an extremely hot or extremely cold shower immediately after waking. And this is the one that genuinely surprises most people the first time they hear it laid out clearly. Frank was 70 and had taken pride for years in starting every morning with an intensely hot shower, the hotter, the better, as a way to wake himself up quickly. Most people think shower temperature is purely a matter of comfort and personal preference with no real cardiovascular relevance. That's a significant gap in understanding because sudden extreme temperature changes trigger genuine, measurable cardiovascular responses. Very hot water causes your blood vessels near the skin to widen rapidly, which can cause blood pressure to drop somewhat suddenly, particularly as you step out of the heat afterward. Very cold water does close to the opposite. It triggers a rapid constriction of blood vessels and a sympathetic nervous system response, similar in nature to the fight or flight activation we discussed with caffeine, temporarily raising blood pressure and heart rate. Either extreme on its own is a manageable adjustment for most healthy cardiovascular systems, but layering either extreme directly onto the already active morning surge asks your blood vessels to make another significant rapid adjustment during a window where they're already working harder than usual. The practical fix here is genuinely simple. Use a lukewarm shower, particularly for the first several minutes, rather than jumping straight to an extreme temperature the moment you step in. If you enjoy a hotter or colder shower as part of your routine, that's not something you necessarily need to give up entirely. Consider saving the more extreme temperature for a bit later in your shower once you've eased into it, rather than starting there immediately upon waking. You have any diagnosed heart condition, uncontrolled blood pressure, or a history of stroke, this is a conversation worth having directly with your doctor, since sudden temperature extremes can carry more meaningful risk for some people than others, and an individualized answer is more useful than a blanket rule. It's worth understanding why this matters more with age specifically, rather than being a concern at every stage of life equally. Younger, more flexible blood vessels generally adjust to rapid temperature-driven changes quickly and without much strain. Blood vessels tend to stiffen somewhat with age, a normal part of the aging process, which means the same rapid adjustment that a 30-year-old's cardiovascular system handles easily can ask more of a system that has less flexibility to work with. This isn't a reason to fear a hot or cold shower entirely. It's simply why easing into a temperature extreme, rather than starting with it immediately, becomes a more meaningful precaution as we get older. The mistake most people make, exactly like Frank, is treating an intense shower temperature as an energizing, harmless habit without realizing it's asking their cardiovascular system to do real, measurable work at the exact moment it's already managing a natural surge on its own. Within just a few days of easing into a lukewarm shower rather than an extreme one, many people notice they actually feel steadier and more clear-headed getting out rather than the brief lightheadedness some people experience after a very hot shower in particular. It's a small shift, but one that tends to be noticeable almost immediately, which makes it an easy habit to stick with once you try it. Here it is. The habit that changes the conversation entirely, and the one I see skipped more often than any other on this entire list: not drinking water after waking. This carries real weight because, unlike the other three habits, this one isn't about avoiding an extra stressor. It's about actively supporting your cardiovascular system during a window when it needs that support most. And here's why this gets overlooked so consistently. It doesn't feel urgent. There's no obvious sensation prompting you to drink water first thing, the way thirst might prompt you later in the day. So it's easy to reach for coffee or simply start your morning routine without giving hydration a single thought. But overnight, even during normal sleep, you lose a meaningful amount of fluid simply through breathing and through the body's ordinary overnight processes, and you go roughly 7 or 8 hours without replacing any of it. That mild overnight fluid loss means your blood volume is already slightly reduced right as your body is asking your cardiovascular system to manage a significant pressure surge, adding one more layer of strain onto a system that's already working harder than it will for the rest of the day. You don't need an elaborate hydration protocol here. Here's what the evidence actually supports. A full glass of water, roughly 8 to 12 ounces, as the very first thing you do upon waking, before coffee, before anything else. This single habit supports healthy blood volume right as your cardiovascular system is navigating its most demanding hour, and it pairs naturally with the pause we discussed in Habit 1, giving your body a moment to hydrate and stabilize before you're up and moving through your day. If you take a diuretic or blood pressure medication that affects your fluid balance, this habit is worth mentioning to your doctor specifically, not because it's dangerous, but because your individual fluid needs may differ slightly from a general recommendation, and your doctor can tell you if any adjustment makes sense given your particular medications. A practical tip that makes this habit easier to actually stick with: keep a glass or bottle of water on your nightstand the night before, so it's the very first thing you see upon waking, rather than something you have to get up and find. Small friction points like having to walk to the kitchen first are often the difference between a habit that sticks and one that quietly falls away after a few days. Before your 30-day challenge, I want to leave you with a tool you can bring to your very next doctor's appointment. I call it the Morning Heart Safety Checklist. 5 questions, and any good physician will welcome every one of them. First, based on my blood pressure history, is my morning surge something we should be specifically monitoring, and would home blood pressure readings right after waking be useful? Second, given my current medications, is there anything about morning timing, coffee, showers, or getting up that I should be handling differently? Third, have I ever experienced dizziness or lightheadedness upon standing? And if so, is that something we should be evaluating further? Fourth, is my current caffeine intake and its timing appropriate given my blood pressure and heart health specifically? Fifth, are there warning signs specific to morning hours, chest discomfort, sudden weakness, vision changes that I should treat as an emergency rather than waiting to see if they pass? If your doctor brushes off those 5 questions, that tells you something important, too, about how closely your morning routine is being considered as part of your overall heart health. Notice that none of these 5 questions ask your doctor to do anything